Well, good morning, kids. It's I, Grandpaw Peter Koyote, coming to you once again from Crestone, Colorado. Trying a little different take this morning. We got a backdrop. We'll see if it works. Sometimes it does, sometimes it don't. We'll just check it out. Coffee's getting cold this morning. Must be time to move on. Go get a warm-up pretty quick, so we'll get through this as fast as we can. You know me, I'm in no big hurry for anything. Yet, there's a feeling of urgency. Everybody's feeling it. When we last talked to you in that little video, what did we call that? Shoot, I don't remember. But anyway, when we last talked to you, we were beginning to see through the lies. The total and complete lies that we've been raised with since we were little kids. And even before that, in many other lifetimes, just the illusions under which we have lived. And I gotta tell you, there's a lot of what we would call disinformation out there. You're looking outside yourself, you're watching the world around you. If you're on the internet, which most of us are these days, you're getting lots of information from all kinds of corners. And there's misdirection built into a lot of it, because these beings that have lived by the lie, that have gained power from it and feel as if they should be our Lord and Master, fear that they are losing it. And you can feel this fear inside of yourself. And if you do, it's just telling you it's time to face it head on. I remember one time when I was a little kid, I used to feel afraid of dark and closed-in spaces. Claustrophobia, I think, is the term they call it by, but I was just a little kid. I didn't know anything about claustrophobia. I mean, little kid, maybe 4 or 5 years old. But I knew that there was this culvert underneath the railroad tracks the ditch goes through sometimes, and it wasn't always full of water. And when it wasn't full of water, a person could crawl under those tracks. It's about 100 yards long, the pipe going underneath those tracks. And I knew I was scared to death of it. I could feel the fear. You know, it would make my breath short and stuff when I thought about getting in there. But something just told me, my innocent little mind, it was time to go through it. It was, you know, don't worry about the ditch water coming. If it comes, you can turn around and crawl right back out again faster than that water can get there. You ain't going to drown. Nothing bad is going to happen to you, other than you might crawl on something unpleasant inside there. Who knows what's in that ditch water? So I just ducked myself down and did it. Crawled through that 100 yards of pipe, and I didn't do it fast either, but I did it. And nothing slimy got on me other than a little mud, and you know, I turned right around and crawled back out the other direction. And after that, I was a little less afraid of closed-in and narrow places. Though I do remember one time in my younger teenagerhood, I think I was about 12, 13, and a group of us boys went up the mountain to a place called Rabbit Ears Cave. There were mountains above my home where I was raised, and of course there's caves there, you know, and we knew about this one, but none of us had ever been in it, you know. It's quite an extensive little network of caves back in off this cliff face on this mountain called Buckley. I went up there with my buddies. It's quite the climb, boy. I'll tell you, you know, it's like 2-3 miles from the valley floor, and it's pretty rugged climbing, especially that last little bit up this, I guess you'd call it a rock slide. And we got up there, and the entrance of this cave is about yay wide. I mean, you can just barely squeeze into it, but it's really tall. But there was this thought that entered my mind as I began to enter that cave with my friends, that little opening could close up just like that if the earth decided to shake while I was there. And you know, that was a fear I couldn't shake. That was one that I just couldn't get over. So I chose not to go back in that cave that day despite the long hike we had. And I sat out there and sung to myself and enjoyed the birds and the bees and the air and the trees while my buddies went in there exploring. And they had a darn good time and nobody got hurt and there wasn't any earthquake. But I didn't feel like I'd failed or anything. I just felt like that wasn't the thing for me, for whatever the reason. Maybe had I gone in there, something might have happened, a rock might have fallen on me, who knows. But I just knew the difference between that fear and just my general fear of closed-in places, claustrophobia. And I took this fear as a genuine warning of something that bad could happen. There was a difference. So even though it felt dark, this fear, and even though it seemed unjustified even after the fact, I held true to it. And there was another time. I'm still about that same age, 12, 13. And I was raised up in a religion called Mormon, and it was in Utah, and it was like the center of life in that state, in the place where we live, this little farming town. And there's the local church house, and heck, my dad had helped build that place and installed the organ in it and everything like that, so there was like a lot of connection to it. You did a lot of volunteer work. And so one weekend, I think it was a Saturday, a bunch of the boys, myself included, were gathered there, and we were supposed to go down underneath the church in these little tiny crawl spaces, that weren't 2 feet wide, 3 feet wide, and about 12, 14 inches tall, maybe a little more, maybe it was 18 inches, but so that's 1.5 feet for those of you that know American measure. But anyway, we were expected to crawl back in there and put this insulation around the heating pipes so that they wouldn't be losing so much heat. Costs less money to heat the building if you can keep your pipes warm, And it's a thoughtful and an intelligent thing to do, and a noble thing for us kids. But when it came right down to it, I refused. There was again one of those feelings that if I went back in there, something not nice would happen. And of course I got my butt in a little bit of trouble because of it, and my unchristian attitude. Don't you want to give to the church? Well, by that time in my life I didn't want to give them very much anyway, so that was another factor. But to me, it was just something senseless about doing that. I felt like in some way there was an inherent danger there, and I just couldn't do it. I didn't know what the danger was. I sensed that maybe it was something beyond my fear of closed-in places. But it was just something I couldn't do, despite all the difficulty it would cause in my life. Believe me, it was much easier to go along and get along than it would have been to resist, even in a small thing like that, which is essentially volunteer work, and nobody should be forcing you to volunteer, but that's essentially what happened. But I didn't do it. I stood firm on my ground. And yeah, I felt kind of shitty afterwards, but at the same time, I knew I was doing what I needed to do. There was, some confidence there in what I was feeling. And as I look back on it now, I can see the difference in those feelings. There's sometimes you just know. And sometimes you have to stick to your guns, even when you don't know why. And that's what I did there too, and that's what I did up at the cave, despite the peer pressure. Because your buddies are going to harass you, call you chicken and so forth, of course. But I found out years later, of course, that that stuff we were putting around those pipes for insulation was kind of dangerous. It's fiberglass, and that dust will ruin your lungs, And probably wasn't the wisest things for us little kids to be doing, was pushing around back in there where all this leftover insulation is anyway, let alone the stuff we're pushing along ahead of us, and getting a big old breathful every time we move, So there was some common sense, some reason behind why I couldn't do that. Despite the darker feelings of it. And believe me, those beings around us back then, and even now of course, but not as good, but they knew how to play it. How to play on your guilt, which is another fear. And man, it made me feel terrible for sticking to my guns. And like I said, I didn't even know why, I just did it. Well, the things we're moving into now, you're going to have some discernment. Because a lot of noble and grand ideas are going to come your way. And there's beings out there that are going to appear as your saviors. As if you need one. Or more. In this world, we've lived by the light so long that we've learned to fear truth. Now, truth has something to do with those levels of knowing I've been talking about in these little boyhood stories. It's just like from the time I was tiny, I wanted to please my parents. I wanted to do good by everybody. I loved the ideals that everyone should love one another. You should treat each other the same way you'd want to be treated yourself, and so on. There was nothing wrong with that. But the dogma, the brainwashing, you wouldn't believe the incredible pressures on a child in a society like that. It's basically a closed society there in Utah. At least it was at the time. This was the late 40s, early 50s, on into the 60s. You know what I mean? That's my childhood. And the pressures there were extreme. And I know the beings around me were innocent in doing it, but they were trained and taught by these people in Salt Lake City and by their ancestors before them who'd been brainwashed into it too, to spread this brainwashing, to share it, to create pressures on the children that would be certain they would comply with the rules and regulations of the church, let alone those of the government and the laws around you. And right from the time I was tiny, I saw these beings in this church, this religion, that were not what they were supposed to be. They were acting out a noble thing on Sundays and in their church meetings during the week, and in their personal relationships with people. But I could see that it was just a veneer, that it wasn't really that person at all. And I saw a lot of these people, not all of them. There were some real sincere ones there that really believed what they were taught and tried to live it. And I applaud those beings. You know, they were powerful, more powerful than any of the people that rose up in the ranks of the religion and became, you know, authorities there. Because these were the ones that never would, because they meant it. You know, and they're not players. What society around you always demands is players. Those that will compromise themselves in some way for a raise in position, an increase in power, and most of essentially money. So I saw a lot of this around me as a tiny child. These people that were, you know, one way in church on Sunday and then another way come Monday morning doing business with their friends and associates, you know. Some tried to be decent. Some were quite powerful in their decency, but at the same time, when it come to business, they were treacherous. You just didn't want to do business with them. I could see this from a distance, from just a little kid's standpoint. I could see that they were kind of like cold, empty shells. They didn't mean anything they said, and quite often did noble actions just for the deception of others. Now, you ask a little kid to define that in those terms, couldn't do it then, sure can now. I just felt a sense of rebellion. You know, that this world stinks. And that kind of thing shouldn't be allowed to go on. That no civilized society should even consider it. Well, good grief, you can imagine how I felt years later when I got out in the real world. But you know, I found a lot more decency out there than in these phony societies that were built on a complete lie. I mean, a partial lie is better than a complete lie as far as having to live under it. But truth has always been known. Like the little kid that detected the shallowness, the emptiness in the beings around him, and could literally see some of the darker forces that were pushing people around and making them this way. I guess I was a little more gifted than most, because I watched them around me knuckle under and become what they wanted to be. Sometimes years and years later, they had a way of wearing people down, and they would catch you in your darker moments. You know, something bad had happened in your family or something. That's when they'd come at you and play on your emotions and try to activate the brainwashing in you once again so that you would become as they were. It's kind of like living in a land filled with zombies. And you know, out there in the outer world outside of Utah, I found a whole lot less zombies. I mean, they were still there. They're everywhere, of course. But it's this kind of disinfo that we're dealing with now. It's coming from the same kind of people. Some of those same people, their children, are in ruling positions in our government now, and in this world around. It's not just government. Government's only a part of it. It's the world we live in. It's the vision we have, the sight we see. Something in you says there's more to it than this. In that innocence that you supposedly lost in your childhood and began to become streetwise, in that innocence is the awareness of truth. The same thing that lets little kids see through the phoniness of the adults around them. And sometimes it's expressed in darker terms, because what can you do in a situation like that but rebel or conform? That's the choices you were presented with. These days, a little different, and it can be far more subtle than that, because everybody in their innocence knows the world is finally making the changes that it's long since sought after, that's been cried for from everybody's grieving heart, those that knuckle under and those that rebel. Everybody grieves at the way society behaves itself or misbehaves itself, at the way that callousness has become the rule of the day, and that money talks and bullshit walks. In other words, in money is the power. But everybody knows that existence, the center of our society, as Americans, and in a broader sense the whole world to varying degrees, but everybody's been captivated by this money world. Money talks, bullshit walks. In other words, give me the money, I'll do what you want me to. I'll compromise myself. Everybody's faced with those kind of choices. And we haven't always made the right choices because you got to have the money to survive. And if you want to have a comfortable life, you got to have a lot of it. Now, many people have sold their souls to the devil, so to speak, just to get by in this world. But we all know in the innocent side of ourselves that it's time for it to come to an end, that there is an end to it, that the callousness wears out, the heartlessness and the conceit and the arrogance of those who think to rule over us. And the conceit and the arrogance being their own way of hiding from the fear of themselves. Because inside they know they're a little love muffin too, what's left of them. And you would not believe the incredible corruption that happens to people that rise up in power, in positions of power in our society. Some of them are impossibly corrupted as children by what we call ritual abuse. And it is abuse, believe me, but it goes on in the secret parts of society. I recommend you read this book written by yours truly, under the pen name Coyote Bear, with a K. I recommend you read that because that'll give you a little bit of a view of what we already know, and what's been going on in the background, and what's caused people to become so callous and severe. You go through stages and steps of this as you sell out and become what they want you to be. And ultimately, you will become a zombie. You will become an empty shell. Yourself will be so hidden from yourself you won't even know it's there. Because you'll be operated through by energies and powers you can't even pretend to understand, but by some reason you like. And you like them doing it. And you like what it does through you. Now we're talking to those that live in this darkness. You know, this is how it happens. This is what happens. And so these beings that are so incredibly corrupted, of course, don't want to let go of what they got hanging on to. They feel they have power over others and influence. They feel like God. Or at least a small God. Well, babies, that's what I'm here telling you, is it's all coming apart. It's a joke. And we've all reacted to it to varying degrees of seriousness because we didn't get the joke. But the joke is that what darkness has sought after so long, through its callousness and its uncaring control of others, is the very thing that we are. It wants to be God, ruler of all. Well, it doesn't quite understand the concept of ruler or creator. And that's why it's taken destruction as its mode, or building monuments to itself, you know, to make it feel good about its empty old self. But what it wants is what your heart wants you to see, what it wants you to know. And in our pure innocence, we already do know. So that's what's meant when they say you got to be like a little kid in order to understand. Let's go back to the innocence. Become aware of that innocence. And this is what allows you to see truth when it's presented around you as well as inside of you. This is when you can begin to acknowledge the truth of both light and dark feelings inside. Because each is trying to define you, help you find your way. And each is based on a concern of one sort or another. And therefore they can be noble in your mind, in your heart. And when you begin to see that what each is seeking is the same thing, this is going to purify your path. And this is when the true world around you begins to reveal itself. The powerful dynamic of love that's in everything and everybody. And this is when the beings of power lose control over you. Because you found essential peace. Do you realize that? That when you understand that all beings and energies serve the same God that's inside of yourself, that each is seeking to be that which we already are, we've just misunderstood the concept of God, you know, and it's deliberately been manipulated that way so that others would feel like God was a powerful being that you know, created and made things and made people do things, and you could displease this God and piss him off and so on and so forth. I mean, it's such a callous and shallow thing, a God that's angry and won't take your shit. But the real love is happy that you're living however you're living. The real love is the truth you already feel inside, the joy at being in the presence of that God all the time, even in your worst moments. And through force and compulsion, you're learning that you don't need force and compulsion, that nobody, no thing, no energy, no power can rule over you or push you around or wants to. That's the lie. That's the illusion. Now, as you begin to consider this inside of yourself, you will begin to see the world around you with more innocent eyes. And you'll be able to ascertain truth from fiction. You'll be able to see the manipulative mind control that they play on you all the time, or try to, you know. And it's in persons very close to you, not just in our institutions, our governments and religions and so forth. It's in the people around you. I mean, this is a thread that goes back to the beginnings of time, the corruption that crept in and began to solidify itself. It's in here, but understand too, it's an experience of separation that we chose for ourselves. We want to know what it was like to feel unloved, to feel no love, because love was always known before that time, that we incarnated and came down here and became this, you see. And we needed also to end that concept that there could be no love, that life could exist without love. But how else to do it other than living through it? That's why we've chosen it to be this way. And of course we are that rescue crew I've talked about earlier, who came to pull out the brothers and sisters that got so deep into the darkness they didn't know any difference. So human beings have been ruled over and controlled by this energy through various means for generations now, long time. And yeah, it's an alien and foreign presence to us in that way. But at the same time, when you get down to the reality, the innocent reality, these entities that we see as so evil, are our brothers and sisters. And we have the power now to share this view with them, to help them awaken and remember of their ancient origins too. We all come from the center of existence, from the heart of creation, the caring mother, who is not the brutal father. We've misunderstood, we've been pushed into a concept that isn't real. There is no need anywhere for belligerent power. No need to push anyone into the truth. Just coast, slide into it. Recognize the innocence within yourself that gives definition to truth. That lets the truth exist and be within you as well as around you. You see how we unconvince the darkness? Simply by being who we are. The truthful, innocent being that doesn't deny it any longer within themselves. Whatever truth is, whatever form it comes to you in, acknowledge that. Because it can exist in the darker presence as well as the light. And you're no further from the truth when you've fallen clear into the darkness and let it take over and rule you. You're no further from the truth than you are if you live in the presence of light constantly. Because that's your truth. No matter what role you're playing in this life, you're living in constant light, constant love. And you exist because this love allows you to be what you seem to want to be. See, it's kind of like play acting. Before we come here, we get to choose our roles and some of the experiences we're going to have. This is something you'll be recognizing and remembering as you go through this process we call awakening, which is to see truth. And it's outstanding to know this, to recognize this, to be this that you are, because then it helps others convince themselves of the reality of the truth they're already seeing. Everyone has tried to put away their innocent eyes and heart, because that's the rule here. You can't be innocent and live. You got to be smart enough to take care of yourself, so on and so forth. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it's real to the extent we've given it that reality. But what we've given, we can take back and receive in a whole different way. So that's the beginning of the process of truth revealing itself through you today. And because of this, you're going to give up a whole lot of judgment you've held on yourself and others too. I mean, it's mostly subconscious because, you know, in the decency of your heart, you don't want to judge anybody or rule over them. Oh, and this is the big misunderstanding. I've got to explain this one. It's simple. People think ruler means somebody that bosses everybody else around. Well, it's not that way anymore. It's kind of like ruler is a measurement. Those by which the reality is measured. That's what a ruler is. And those, of course, that try to convey the peace and love and spread it far and wide, because that's how they want to be measured. See the difference? See the innocence in it? Excuse my background for being a mess. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. Not till it works better than that. But see the innocence. See how it works. Understand. Contemplate this within yourself. And tonight you'll go on a journey. And tomorrow morning you'll wake up refreshed and happy and powerful once again. Babies, we love you. Keep on trucking. Talk to you again real soon. Peace and plenty for all.